the class. Talk a little bit about the quiz in a second, but I want to announce that your first problem set is going to be put online today. I'll just show you what it looks like. I have to share my screen, don't I? There we go, should be better. All right, so if you go on to your Canvas, go under assignments, it will be under either assignments or upcoming assignments. It's not available right now. It's available after our class ends, just because if I give it to you now, that's what you're going to be looking at. But it's going to look something like this, and I'll just go over some things you need to know. It's due on the 24th, so a week from today by class time. So get it in by 12:30. You're going to, when you go on here, there's going to be an upload option to put it on Canvas. Please don't email me it. I like to have everything in one area so I don't get too confused. Of course, a lot of this is going to be, math work. You're probably going to be doing it by hand on a piece of paper, and that's fine. So you can scan it to me if you have a scanner, but if not, you can use your phone to take the pictures. Just make sure they're clear and I can actually read what you're sending me. And that's not a problem. If you want to put some of it on a Word document, some of it on your pictures, that's fine too, whichever you prefer. But just send everything onto Canvas. When you upload everything, you should try to make sure everything opens. So I don't get any corrupted files or missing links or anything. Make sure they open for you, and if they don't open for me, you're going to get a 0 on it. I will set any late assignments until the start of class, the next class on the Tuesday, the 29th. So there will be a flat 20% deduction on any late assignments. But after the 29th, I'm not going to accept anything late. That's just because we're going to be going over the assignment in class, and I want everybody to have it in already. You may work with others, but you need to submit your own assignment. And I definitely recommend showing your work rather just putting 1C, the answer's 5 or whatever. You might make a mistake, and I can see that you're still working the right way, and then I'll get you some points. So show your work. You'll see when you get to look at it more. There's one big question, supply and demand. I will have you draw out the market, the graph. This drawing does not have to be nice and perfect or anything like that. Just a sketch really put some of the important numbers like equilibrium, the intercepts, label supply and demand, and those things, and that'll be fine. You don't have to put numbers on it or anything like that. They have different weights, different questions. You can see how much they're worth. The second question is just some derivatives. And this last part I wanted to note, the last question says you're going to find the derivative with respect to x1 and then x2. And then the last part is just dividing that derivative with respect to x1 over the derivative with respect to x2. Didn't come out to you nice looking, but I wanted to let you guys know that's what I want there. All right. So it'll be available at 1:45. And I recommend looking at it this weekend, definitely before Tuesday. So if you have questions, you have time to ask me and I can help you with anything you want to know, either in office hours, if you want to ask me in class before or after, that's fine as well, or just email too. The average I saw on the quiz, this was maybe 12:10 today, so people might have put theirs in before 12:30. It was about a 63. Now that's not too bad for this type of class, but I did think it was a little low for this first quiz. First of all, remember that one of these quizzes are dropped, so it's not that this is going to kill your grade. Altogether, each quiz is only worth less than 2% of your grade. So, even if you get a few of these lower grades, it's not going to kill your grade either. But, you have a lot of resources at your disposal. The notes have a lot of information. And, even so we're in this like weird class and a lot of you may not be taking notes, it might be good to write down some of the important things to make sure that you have them and at least something that you can go back to kind of easily. So let me on the sketchpad maybe. So I just wanted to go over a few things that I saw people having trouble on. First of all, you want to know like what complements and substitutes are, and of course how they affect demand. Let's say, we have a demand function. Let me start this way. Let me say we have a demand function. 75 minus 2q. So our intercept is a 75, and you want to remember that this contains everything that affects demand. So this contains, prices of other goods. Let's put related. An income possibly might be your preferences put in somewhere here. When we actually had formulas that had like M's and PZs in it, what we typically did was we threw the prices in and that income in. And so we were able to simplify our demand function into something like this. So the 75 or the intercept really just holds all of these things once we put those prices, that income in and everything. So this is anything that really is going to shift the demand curve. So you want to remember we have a lot of things that'll shift the demand curve. They're in the PowerPoints. These are outside forces. So what we were, I was just going over, the prices of a related good, but a different good. Your income, preferences might be in there. These are all things that move demand up or they move it down. And, that intercept really tells us where we are. If we have a higher intercept, it might be above, or a lower intercept, it might be lower. So those are shifts in demand. Now, if we're talking about, we can talk about this in 2 ways, but maybe a quantity demanded change. Quantity demanded, remember, these are points on the demand curve. These show at a certain price, I'm just going to put P1, exactly how much we're demanding of this product, the actual quantity. So when we're changing quantity demanded, we're moving on the same demand curve. We're not shifting demand up or down. And that comes from just a price change. So maybe the price goes down here. And if it does, we go to a different point on the demand curve, and that gives us a different quantity. So here it follows the law of demand. If price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. But so price changes really affect just the quantity demanded. So price changes of this good. And some of this is language. So economists and econ is notorious for some of these bad language uses. Anything up here, the related prices, the income, these are going to affect or shift demand. Price change down here though for this good affects the quantity demanded. So it's two different things. Demand is this whole line, whereas quantity demanded is just a point or an actual number you can think. So demand is representing all these different possibilities, whereas quantity demanded is just one of them. So outside forces affect the demand and where it is, whether it's an increase or decrease, but prices affect the quantity demanded. You want to make sure you have that down. And I'll show you for supply. Let's say you had a formula for supply, something like this. This is an inverse supply formula, and you should know it's supply because we have a positive slope the number on Q is positive. So our picture would be something like this. And we have an intercept down here. This is kind of like what we were doing with consumer and producer surpluses. One of the things we wanted to find was the intercept. The intercept for supply here, now it's kind of easy when you have this inverse, we want to set Q equal to 0. This is what we want to do no matter what we're given. And when we do that, the intercept is just equal to that constant term. Just this 20 because this goes to 0. So down here, this might be 20. If we had this changed, maybe P equals 40 plus 3Q. There was some sort of shift, maybe a technology change, the price of a resource change, but this affected the supply curve and it shifted it. Now we can look at the new intercept. Well, it's the second one. We're going to do the same thing, set Q equals 0, and it's still the constant term. So now this is 40. And so if we just draw that real quick, we went from the first one with that intercept of 20 to the second with the intercept of 40. This change is a leftward shift, or we can say supply fell. Now it fell even though our constant terms in our equations, they went up. We went from 20 to 40. Because of the shape of this curve, having a higher intercept actually means we have a lower supply. If our intercept were to fall, go to 10, or even become negative, and that's possible, then we would have an increase. So it's a little opposite than maybe what comes naturally to us to think about. And actually, when we have demand, a higher constant means that we're increasing demand. But because of the shape difference, we're upward sloping here, a increase here is going to decrease demand or supply, excuse me. An increase in the intercept decreases supply here. So those are just some things you want to maybe have in the back of your mind. This is written out explicitly on the slides for you. And this might help, you know, both of these, what I talked about with demand and also here, when you're doing a problem set and, you know, you have the math that says, okay, we went from one supply curve to the other. But I might ask you, like, does this make sense? You know, does the change in resource prices from one to another that caused this, does that make economic sense? Should supply have gone down is really what I'm asking here. And you want to know that supply went down so you can actually answer this question instead of just being like, you know, well, supply went up and, you know, that doesn't make sense or something along those lines. So knowing this picture might help you when you're doing a problem set or even on like a quiz or the future like midterm, because you want to make sure, you know, what you're doing mathematically also makes sense, you know, economically, that it actually follows this theory. All right, was there any questions on the quiz? All right. Any questions on the problem set or anything like that? We're all good. All right, let me start off. So last class we did consumer and producer surplus. I'm going to give us just another example to start the class with. The example of the supply and demand that I'm giving you is something we've already seen. I had you find the equilibrium last class, so you might have that in your notes. quantity demanded is 250 minus 5p, and quantity supplied is just 5p. So again, we did this in class yesterday. We found that the quantity in equilibrium was 125 and the price was 25. In case you don't remember that, what we did was we set quantity demanded equal to quantity supplied, solved for the price, and once we got 25, we plugged the price back in to get the demand, the quantity supplied or demanded, which was the same, 125. So then I might ask, instead of just this, you know, what is the consumer surplus? What is the producer surplus? And for me, at least, I like to start by drawing this out. You know, just a quick sketch, nothing that is accurate. But what this does is allows me to see what I need, maybe, or what I have versus what I need. So when we talk about consumer surplus, remember, this is the benefit consumers are getting from the market. In our example here, we look at maybe a point up here. There was people that wanted this product, say it's a pair of jeans. And when they went to the mall, they went to the store, they had $40 in their pocket, or $30, or $28, whatever, anything higher than 25. They were willing to spend that amount. But when they got to the store, the sign said $25. Now there's people who are willing to spend more than that, have this extra money that they can do whatever they want with. They can save it, they can spend it, whatever, it doesn't matter. That's the benefit, or a positive thing that they're getting from the market. Saying benefit in 5 different ways, but the surplus they're getting, we call it. And so the surplus altogether is just measured in this top triangle. It's the area below the demand, but above the equilibrium price. So because some people are willing to spend more than 25, this is what it captures. And we said this is the area of a triangle. You know, it's just a triangle. It's supposed to be pretty straight and linear. So we can use, you know, our old 1/2 base times height formula. What else do we need to solve this, to actually figure out the surplus?
You need to find the intercepts.
Yeah, we definitely need the intercept. So we need to figure out this height, what this top number is, where demand hits the p-axis, and same with supply. We'll need that for the producer surplus. So I call this the point D. And as we were saying before, when I was talking about supply and stuff, we're finding the intercepts by just setting the quantity equal to 0, because when we're at this point up here, there's no Q. Okay. And you want to watch yourself. So last time that we did an example for consumer surplus, you were given the inverse demand function and the inverse supply. That was like P equals a function. We're given now just the regular function. And the quantity is on the left-hand side. That is where we want to put the 0. We don't want to put it into the P because we'd get a totally different number and that'll mess up our equation. So our, solving for that intercept should look like 0 equals 250 minus 5p. And we solve for this price. So bring the 5p over and then divide by 5. And due to that, your intercept is at 50. this number should be above the equilibrium price. So, you know, if you got 10, you know, there's a problem there. So again, picturing this might also help you see an issue that you have. Once we get the intercept, we have all we need to actually solve for the surplus. So it's 1/2, and the base is the quantity in equilibrium. The height is the intercept minus the price in equilibrium. So this area, this amount. So we just now add things in here where they, where they need to be. The Q from before, 125, and the intercept 50 minus 25. So 1/2, 125 times 25. Obviously, putting that in your calculator, and if you do that correctly, you should get 1,562.5. And this is measured in dollars, which doesn't look like it is. So measured in dollars, that's the extra amount consumers have when they ended up paying only $25 for this good. Because again, some were willing to pay up to like $49.99, but they ended up getting a better deal and they have more money to spend elsewhere or to do whatever they want with. We don't care what they do. Just in this example. I'm just going to give a different color for producers. Now the producer surplus is the triangle below consumer surplus. And we have a similar idea, but with the sellers or the suppliers. Some of these sellers were willing to sell the item for less than this $25. You know, they were willing to sell it for $10 or $3 or $8 or, $20, whatever. But the market says they can sell it for $25, so they're getting more money than they expected. This is the benefit coming into them because they were willing to this price in the market is higher than what they're willing to spend. So we need the intercept for supply. We're still going to set the quantity equal to 0, but we do that in the supply function. So this 5p up here. So it just looks like 0 equals 5p. We solve for p, divide by 5 on both sides. The intercept is actually 0. So you see, I didn't draw this too correctly because I didn't want to give you, an answer before we did it. The line should go through the axis, but that's fine. I made this drawing and I'm putting a 0 here. And if you did something like that, that's also fine, like on your homework. All right, so we kind of lose one number and it makes our calculation a bit easier. Now the producer surplus. And remember, these formulas are in the notes, in the slides. So you can always go back to it, but maybe making a note card just so you have them all in one place might be helpful. So it's equal to 1/2. The base is still 125 to Q. All right, maybe I'll just write this here. So it's 1/2 Q star and then times the equilibrium price minus the intercept. So this should all be in one line. 1/2 Q star, then times P star minus the intercept. So P star is 125 still. The price is 25, and then we're subtracting 0 if we want to be more accurate. And this looks maybe kind of familiar. When we multiply this out, we're going to get $1,562.50. This just happens to be the same as above here. It doesn't mean anything except this is how the numbers ended up working out. We don't say that this is more efficient or anything than normal. We're still efficient because we're at the equilibrium point, but overall, it wouldn't have mattered if consumer surplus was greater than the producer surplus or vice versa. We're all getting benefits from the market. It's just worked out nicely. Anytime that we're at the equilibrium, so we're at this intersection, we can say that we have efficiency. We are maximizing our surpluses. Consumer surplus is the biggest it can be, and so is producer surplus. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the slides. And we talked a little bit last class about just what some of these interventions were, like price ceiling and price floor, because I wanted you to know that for the quiz. But now we're going to look at it more mathematically. So price ceiling, this is a maximum price or like a price cap. Say it's an intervention because the government's coming in and intervening in the market. And we say that this price ceiling, it should be below the equilibrium price. And that was the idea that if we were selling a good for $5 and the government bursts in and says, hey, you guys can't sell this for more than $10, we'd be like, all right, we weren't, everything's good. And it wouldn't affect the market any. So a higher price ceiling than the equilibrium price, we would have the same equilibrium and nothing would change. Obviously, that's not interesting or something we'd probably want to talk about here because we don't have to do anything. When it's below the equilibrium price, that is when we have a change. We're not in equilibrium anymore. Now, what a lower price does, when we think about, say, consumers in the market, consumers see that this price decreased and we like lower prices. We always want to spend less. So the amount of us that actually want the product is going to increase. This is represented by the quantity demanded here, and it's hard to see, I know. But when it comes to sellers, they don't want to sell at such a low price, or not everyone wants to sell at a low price. So some of them are going to stop putting their stuff out there. And so the quantity supplied is actually going to fall. It's going to be less than this. Since quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied, we have what's called excess demand. I keep messing that up. Excess demand. Excess demand is also known as a shortage. When everyone goes to buy this product, there's not going to be enough on the shelves for everyone to get their hands on, because there's going to be too many people that want it compared to the amount that sellers want to sell. All right, now let's look at an actual problem. We're going to use a problem that we did last class as well. I'm going to work with it for the next couple times. We had supply and demand. The first equation, 24 minus Q, is the demand. The quantity has a negative coefficient, so this is downward sloping. The second one is the supply, again, a positive coefficient on Q. And we already solved this out. The quantity in equilibrium was 14, and the price was 10. Now, just draw this real quick. So now let's say the government is putting a ceiling here. It should be below this $10, and it's going to be $8. And we might want to ask ourselves, all right, how does that affect the market? So we can look at now what the quantity demanded is for, or quantity demanded is, and also the quantity supplied. See that difference. So for demand, we want to put the $8 into our inverse demand function, put it in for P, and we want to just solve for Q. Algebra, we're going to add both sides and subtract the 8 here. Quantity demanded, I'm going to put a C here just to represent the price ceiling, is 16. And do the same thing for supply. I'm just adding the D and the S here just to make sure we have this down. If you don't do that, it's not a problem. Just, you know, this is the amount consumers want, and this will be the amount suppliers want. And it's fine that you don't necessarily label these as long as you get the idea correct. So I'm going to subtract 3 on both sides, and we get 5 equals 0.5 QS. And we're dividing here by 0.5. Might want to watch your fractions. And if you're bad with using fractions, put this in your calculator. And this actually comes out to 10 for the quantity supplied. So let me get a different color. So at $8, move over. We hit the supply curve graphically here at 10 units, but we hit the demand at 16. So again, more people want this item than the sellers want to sell. Whenever we have the quantity demanded greater than quantity supplied, that's always a shortage. And we can look at the difference. So like 16 minus 10, this says there's a 6-unit shortage here. There's like 6 people who want to buy an extra unit that can't get their hands on one here, for example. So I want to ask, what's the amount that's actually sold in the market? All right, we have 2 different quantities.
It would be 10 because you can't sell 16 if you can't supply 16.
Right, that's right. So it is 10 that's actually sold in the market. Even though there's 16 people that want it, there's only 10 to sell. So that's the amount actually in the market. The 16 is just like, this is how much we want, but this is what's being sold. Now I'm going to go back to the slides just because this looks probably a little nicer. But it is somewhat hard to see. All right, so this line down here is like that 10 units, the quantity supplied. Now we're going to go up here. We kind of block this off. Now the original function, we had a consumer surplus, and we actually found that last class. And it was this like big triangle at P star. Now I can maybe find you guys a drawing that has like before and afters that might be helpful. But so we have this big triangle. Now though, the consumer surplus, we end at this, 10 units, how much we're actually selling in the market or how much we're actually buying in the market. But it goes a little further down to this new price, that's $8, the price ceiling. Because these buyers are able to buy at a lower price, even though some of them aren't getting the product, we're going to see that the price ceiling increases not the price ceiling, excuse me, the consumer surplus increases when there is a ceiling. Like that. So new consumer surplus is going to be larger, but the producer surplus used to be this area under the P star. Now this has shrunk to just the smaller triangle. So producer surplus falls. And remember, they're selling this product for less than they were. They're selling it for $8 instead of $10. And they're also selling less than they were before. So they're getting, this less benefit. But then we also have this white triangle. This triangle C is known as deadweight loss. And this is a loss of efficiency or just a loss of benefit to society because there is this price ceiling. So some of this is a little abstract and might be difficult to think about, but part of this triangle comes from the consumer surplus, like the old part, and some comes from the producers. So let's think about the consumers. There was all these people, there's 14 altogether that wanted this item. They had different amounts they were willing to buy, or different prices they were willing to spend. But because there's this ceiling, even though some are spending less, some of these people weren't able to get the item. So they, if the price was still at equilibrium, they would have this benefit. But because the price is at a ceiling and they can't buy the item, their surplus goes away. They no longer have this extra benefit because they're not buying this item at all. So that's this top part from the consumer surplus. And similar idea down with here for the producers. There are some sellers who are going to sell like up here, and they were going to get some money, even though like the difference between the equilibrium and what they were willing to sell for was small, they were going to get some surplus. Now, since they're not selling the product at the lower price, again, their surplus just goes away. So this whole triangle C, and that's this loss to society. So we can say that with a price ceiling, we have a larger consumer surplus, a smaller producer surplus, but altogether, total surplus is going to be lower than it was altogether. Remember, total surplus is adding the consumer and producer surplus. So if we added this up, we are going to have a smaller total surplus because this C is being lost and it's just going to this dead weight. It's not going to any kind of type of surplus anywhere. Now, to be honest, I can have you calculate these areas and find like the new consumer surplus and the old one, find the dead weight loss, but I'm not going to have you do that. And the reason why is just that, we did the areas of the triangle. You can do that for B and C because they're still triangles, but A is like a trapezoid, so it gets a little weird. But altogether, it's not too important to find all of these areas because it's more like algebra than it is what we're doing in class. But you want to know these. So on a future quiz, I might ask, there's a price ceiling. Does consumer surplus go up or does it go down? Well, you'd say it would go up. You can always refer back here, but maybe have also an idea of what happened. So because the price ceiling is at a lower price, consumers benefit and producers lose out. All right. Now, the other intervention we spoke about was this price floor. And the government sets a minimum price here. And we say it's above the equilibrium price. So the minimum is something higher than that. And again, that's the idea. If we're selling this good for $5 and the government says we have to sell it above $3, well, we were already doing that. Our market stays the same and our equilibrium doesn't change. We have a story though, when they say, hey, you have to sell this above $8, then we actually have to change everything. So it's legal minimum, and we're going to see that this higher price, this actually hits the demand at a lower quantity. Consumers don't want to pay as much money, for this product when it's a higher, they don't want to pay as much, so they're buying less of this item. But the supply, the quantity supplied will be higher. Sellers want to sell at this higher price. Let's get to the example. I'm going to erase this. Okay. So now let's say the price ceiling was at, or the price floor, excuse me, was at 14. So instead of $10, the minimum price in the market is 14. Something up here. So we can find the quantity demanded and supplied just like we did before. We want to take this 14 and plug it into each price for demand and supply. So like for demand, 14 equals 24 minus Q. Solve for Q, this is quantity demanded, and that equals 10. So the same thing for supply, 14 equals 3 plus 0.5 Q. Subtract 3, we have 11. And then dividing by 0.5, remember that's technically multiplying by 2. And so our new quantity supplied is 22. So they're willing to sell 22 units, but we only demand 10. What is the quantity that's sold in the market here? The quantity sold in the market is still 10. It's the same number, just of how they worked it. Doesn't have to be the same. But now it's the lower of these, like it was for a ceiling. So even though we're putting 22 units out on the shelf, we're throwing that out there, only 10 people actually want this item. So we are, going to leave 12 things on the shelf that no one wants to buy. And that's known as that excess supply or a surplus. So it's just do QS minus QD, 22 minus 10. And that means we have a 12 unit and it's a surplus. So floor is always going to lead to a surplus of some amount. And a ceiling will always lead to a shortage. Always remember too, higher or lower prices. For a floor, we have a higher price, and so there's going to be a surplus, and a lower price for a ceiling leads to a shortage. All right, now I'm going to go back to the slide, show you the surpluses again. I will find a better picture that'll show maybe the before and after for all of these for next class. I'll probably just update this. All right, so this is our new $10 or 10 units. So how much is actually being sold in the market? And this is the price floor. Before, our consumer surplus was this tall triangle that went all the way down to P star, and then over here is the equilibrium. Now there are less people buying the item and they're buying it at a higher price. So their surplus shrinks. We go from, that big triangle down to a smaller one. There's some people that still enjoy a benefit from having the price floor here, but there's some people that are losing out and they're not getting that benefit. So here we have smaller. The producer surplus used to be down here, going all the way to the equilibrium and down. But now they're getting some of this up here, some of this from the consumer surplus, since they're selling at a higher price. So their surplus is going to increase. They're selling these items at a higher price. We're still left with this C, or the dead weight loss, because there's this, basically the surplus that's not being sold. These sellers and these buyers aren't able to get their surplus like they would be if it were in equilibrium. So price floor also leads to a dead weight loss. Our total surplus is going to be less than it was altogether. This is just examples we did. So if you ever too want to go back and redo these, you can always just see the equations here and try them out, and you can always go back to either your notes or the videos to see the if you got those correct. So then the other type of intervention we haven't talked about yet is called a quota. Instead of a price, a legal price of some sort, this is where the government is setting a maximum quantity, or legal maximum quantity. And it should be below the quantity in equilibrium. The same story, we were selling 100 units, but the government says you can't sell more than 150. That doesn't cause any problems. When they say you can't sell more than 80, that's a problem. We're gonna, have a change in the market. So something below the equilibrium. And now the new supply curve. So down here, the supply looks like this. But once we get to the quota amount, whatever that number is, we kind of have a new part of the supply curve made that's just vertical, because we can't go any further up here. This is kind of stopping us. So now how we find, the price and quantity is by where this effective supply, your book calls it, hits the demand curve here. So we're taking really the quantity that is the quota and seeing how much consumers are going to pay for it. So let's go back to the example. Okay. So now, again, if we're setting a quantity for quota, I'm going to just put big Q and little q for quota. And that might be, what is this? Get 10 units. So now we're not going above this 10, not able to kind of. And what we're going to want to do again is see where this quantity hits the demand curve, how much buyers are going to pay for 10 units. So from demand, we have P equals 24 minus 10. This says that consumers will pay $14 for 10 units of this good. Now, of course, my graph doesn't show that very well, but pretend this goes to the 14. They should match up. So sellers are going to sell only 10 units, but they're able to sell 14 of them. Consumers are going to lose out because we were actually buying 14 before, and we were buying it at such a, a lot lower price, $4 difference. So we were buying more before and also at a lower price. So we're losing out again here. Our surplus is going to fall. We're paying a higher price and we're buying less of this item. So just like we just talked about with a floor, our surplus is lower and it kind of looks similar to what we had before. Producers, though, benefit. They are getting a higher price, so and their surplus is going to go up. But we still have the deadweight loss, and that's the difference here between what we were buying and what we are, and then just a triangle here. This quota cuts it off from the original surpluses. Now, this might look very familiar, or should look very familiar just from a few minutes ago. This is actually pretty much the same story as we had for the ceiling, or the floor, excuse me, the floor. So go back. This picture, basically the same. We could cut off, here at a certain quantity. Producers get more surplus and consumers lose out, and there's this dead weight loss. So you can think that the quota affects the market very similar to the floor. I mean, they kind of not go together, but you can maybe remember that what happens to a floor also would happen if there was a quota, and that might help you remember these things. Whereas the price ceiling is going to be just the opposite. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the next section of this chapter one. Chapter one just keeps going on and on. We're not going to have time to actually go through it, but we'll talk a little bit about what this looks like. And it's still an intervention, but now we're talking about taxes. Put some quick definitions here for last class, just so you had them on the PowerPoint. There's two types of taxes we could talk about. The first one is called an ad valorem. It's also value added, you can also call it. This is a percent of the total sale. So if cigarettes are being taxed like this, and I buy $10 worth, I might be taxed, 5%. If you go down the street and a store is selling them for more, they're selling them for $12, you would be paying 5% of the $12. So our amounts might be different depending on how much we're being charged or how much we're buying, the total amount. This is just like a sales tax though. So, what we're used to for the most part. And to be honest, we probably see the ad valorem taxes more often in the actual real world. The only problem with this is that the math is a lot more difficult. It changes a bunch of things that make it really difficult in the class. So we're actually not going to talk about these too much. We're going to talk about per unit taxes. So you want to know what ad valorem is. We're just not going to go through them. But we're going to talk about per unit taxes again. It makes it's a little bit easier on our work. Makes a little bit more sense too, I think, than the ad valorem. So per unit tax is not as seen for the most part, from us at least, but this is a fixed amount tax that's placed on every unit of an item sold. So if the government puts a $5 tax on TVs, it doesn't matter how much the TVs are going to sell for, the price is going to go up or down. This is just $5 for every TV sold. And taxes, for the most part, for both of these, can be placed on either the buyers or the sellers. The government might worry about maybe it's easier to get the tax money from a seller rather than a consumer, because consumers might not do their taxes often, or they might do it wrong, whereas sellers kind of have to be a little bit better with that maybe. So a lot of times we talk about it on the seller side, but it could be placed on consumers. And in this chapter, we're going to talk about what a tax does to the market, how it increases the price, or all of this stuff. But we also are going to talk about what types of goods are going to have be taxed, why the government is choosing these goods, and also who's going to, maybe if there's a benefit, who's going to benefit from these taxes, or who's going to be affected the most from these taxes. So if we think about buyers and sellers as the two parties here, do the sellers lose out more because there's a tax, or do the buyers? And we'll see that it depends on what we're actually buying and what the product is, and also on the demand and supply for that product. I didn't want to do that, did I? I'll just show you what this looks like. So again, we're going to talk about it next week more in depth, but we might have a supply curve that's just like this PO, so no tax, just 3 plus 0.5 Q, something like that. But the tax is going to be added onto that, so $5. So this would just be added. What does that do? That makes the intercept higher. So it's going to shift out or shift back the original supply, and we're going to get to a lower supply curve, this after tax supply. So supply shifts to the left because of the tax. And you can think now every unit sold is $5 more than it once was, or whatever the tax amount is. All right. I don't want to get too much into that because I know we're not going to end up getting to the end. So I'm going to save that for next week. If you're really excited, you can always look forward in the notes. But if not, I would recommend looking at your problem set. Does anybody have questions? Any questions? All right, well, we'll end early, and I hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.